But Dr. Martin Luther King said once, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but I believe it bends towards justice." And I believe he was right. I think that all over the world, people are sick of being sick. We're tired of being tired. We're fed up with a toxic food system, and we are hungry for a change. One of the places that that's showing up in recent years is in the GMO movement and GMO labeling. And it's been a tough fight. But a few years ago, we were very involved in a GMO labeling initiative in the state of Washington called I-522. And the goal was to get, it was on the ballot for voters, and the goal was to get GMOs labeled in the state of Washington. And it started off being very popular. But then the anti-GMO side raised a lot of money. They shattered state records for ballot initiatives in the state of Washington, the amount of money they raised. Tens and tens of millions of dollars, and they blanketed the airwaves with all kinds of ads saying that the price of food for your family will go up if labels go on packages, saying that this would destroy the economy, saying all kinds of terrible things. And people just wanted the right to know if their food was GMO. But this went on, and in the end, we barely lost, like by a fraction of a percent in that election. And I was really disappointed. But then some news broke. So it turns out that the Grocery Manufacturers Association had led the charge, contributing over $30 million to the No campaign. And the Grocery Manufacturing Association is kind of or Manufacturers Association is kind of a consortium of the junk food lobby. They represent a lot of the big food companies. But it turns out that they had withheld the identities of their donors. They didn't say where their money came from, and that turned out to be a violation of campaign finance law in the state of Washington. So the state attorney general sued them, ended up getting the names released of all of their donors, and ended up suing them and winning, prevailing, and the GMA ended up getting hit with a multi-8-figure campaign finance law fine, the largest campaign finance violation in U.S. history. And the GMA is now falling apart. Their members are pulling out. But along the way, I got to thinking, so those companies wanted to hide their identity. They were willing to break the law in order to funnel their money through the GMA and not be accountable for the fact they were funding the fight against our right to know. And then around that time, I was out in a natural food store, and my son River, the ocean refuses no river, my son River and I were out shopping, and I pick up an Odwalla Mango Tango. It's a kind of smoothie drink. Odwalla is owned by Coke. River knows this. River says to me, "Odwalla is owned by Coke." I say, "Yeah, I know." And he says, "So Coke funds the fight against GMO labeling?" And I say, "Yeah, true." He says, "So you want to give your money to Coke?" And I'm like, I said some lame thing about, well, maybe if more people buy Odwalla, then they'll realize that, they should spend more money marketing healthy food instead of junk food. And River says, "So you want to give your money to Coke then?" And I just kind of stopped and very sheepishly put the Coke back, or the Odwalla back on the shelf. And I was turning beet red and thinking, what kind of kid have I raised here? And then it hit me. Food Revolution Network members, for the most part, don't buy a lot of Coke. But we do buy Odwalla, and Dasani, and Zico coconut water, and Honest Tea, and maybe even Vitamin Water, and Simply Orange, and other natural brands that Coke owns. We may not buy a lot of Pepsi, but we might buy a lot of brands that they own. And it struck me that maybe we should call for a boycott of the natural brands owned by the big companies that were fighting our right to know with GMOs. So we launched one, focusing on Coke specifically. And we got over 300,000 people on board. And then we went to Coke, and we said, hey, you all say, because we pulled up their mission statement. We said, you all say you support transparency, and you say you support consumer empowerment. But here you are spending millions of dollars fighting transparency and consumer empowerment. And we think you're on the wrong side of history, and we'd like to see you stop. And lo and behold, they invite us in for a meeting. And so I ended up going to Washington, D.C., and we were working with Center for Food Safety on this campaign. And we got together, and then Coke said, basically, well, we'd like to see a national solution on this issue. And we'd actually like to see GMOs labeled in some way, and we'd like to talk about that. But here's the thing, we're only one small company. We can't do this all by ourselves. Thinking, yeah, right. But then they said, let's pull in others. So we ended up having a series of meetings with leadership from Coke and Nestle and Unilever and Pepsi, American Beverage Association, Mars, other big food companies, and leadership from Food Revolution Network, Center for Food Safety, Consumers Union, which publishes consumer reports, Just Label It, and other major organizations. And this was super top secret at the time. And we all met in Washington, D.C. for a series of meetings over the course of a couple of years. And we actually together came up with a strategy, and we had attorneys from both sides, if you will, drafting legislation that we were going to introduce to Congress that would have been the first time in American history that the food movement and the junk food industry would have introduced joint legislation to Congress on something we could align around. And I am sorry to tell you that just before we got to that point, the Congress passed and the president signed what became known as the DARK Act, the Deny Americans Right to Know Act, which essentially eviscerated GMO labeling in the United States. So our efforts did not bear fruit legislatively at that time. But essentially it made GMO labeling voluntary. But as a result of our conversations, some folks did volunteer. So Mars decided to disclose whenever they use GMOs and to make a lot of their products GMO-free. And when I reached out to thank their vice president, who we'd been working with, he said, well, this happened because of our meetings, and it's something we should have done a long time ago, and we have you to thank. Now, Mars still makes candy. Don't get me wrong. I'm probably not going to become a big fan anytime soon. But I do respect anytime anybody from any position does something to move in a positive direction. And what I saw when I was in those meetings was extraordinary. I was actually asked to facilitate these meetings. And I had to create a safe space for everybody to be in these conversations. And it got heated at times. But we knew we wanted to go towards a common goal if there was one that we could find together. And what I saw was that these folks from Nestle and all these other companies, they don't stay up all night trying to figure out how to poison our kids, how to despoil our environment, or how to torture animals in factory farms. No, they're trying to make money in a food industry and in a food system that is morally bankrupt. And it won't do anybody any good if anytime Nestle comes out with a fair trade, organic, non-GMO, vegan, super healthy product, nobody buys it and the company goes bankrupt. It won't do anybody any good if we cannot find a way to build the marketplace and to build the systems that will create the demand for these companies to be on the right side of history. Because a lot of these folks were practically begging us to help them create the marketplace so they can go to their CEOs and their shareholders and say, you know what, folks, there's no money to be made down the road in the status quo. The things that made us giants last century will make us dinosaurs this century if we don't make a change. And so a lot of these folks want to find the evidence that they can go in the right direction. And one of the ways they're showing it is they're buying up a lot of the natural brands, for better or for worse. Most of our favorite natural brands that we see in health food stores today, about 80% by one measure, are actually owned by mega giant food corporations. So they're hedging their bets, if you will. They're buying a stake in the healthy side while they're still profiting off of junk food. And I have mixed feelings about that. But I will say this, I am grateful for every step anybody takes to support more organic, more fair trade, more natural, less sugar, less junk, less factory farms, less animal products, especially unsustainably produced ones, and more real, wholesome, healthy food that gets accessible and affordable to more people. This is where we got to go.